Hi, I'm Kim Brooks. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Management, and I'm really excited to welcome you to our third and final discussion on the future of management education. Let me begin by acknowledging that we're located at Dalhousie here in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, and we're all treaty people. I'm so excited about the three panelists that we have to spend time with this morning, and I'm sure we're going to enjoy the collective conversation. But let me introduce them to you one at a time so that you get a chance to get to know them a bit too. Let me start off by introducing you to my colleague, Jim.
Hi, Kim. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. It's kind of fun that we get to do this across the country.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you know, it's well, it just got to be sunny in Calgary because the sun just came up. It's our early morning, but yes, it's wonderful to see you from this distance.
Why don't you tell people a little bit about who you are, Jim?
Sure. I'm the dean at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, and just a little bit about my background. It actually breaks up into three equal parts, if you can believe, and 22 is a magic number. So 22 years of being a messy kid and ending with me getting married at 22, which was a great day. And then 22 years of making money in business, mostly in real estate development and engineering. And then at actually age 45 is when I entered my PhD program. And I'm not quite at the next 22, I'm at 64, but I will actually be finishing my role as dean when I'm 66, so exactly 22 years of academics, which I view the middle one as making money and the last one is trying to make a difference.
Cool. Well, Jim, I'm really excited to talk about continuing education, and your story sure is going to tee into that discussion. So thanks and welcome. I'll ask Wanda to come and join us for a brief introduction to her. Hi, Wanda. How are you?
Good morning.
Can I ask you to say a few words about yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Like Jim, I'm in Alberta. So similarly, sun is finally up here and it's shining brightly. It's actually warm. So very excited about that. For folks who don't know, I'm a U.S. citizen. And ironically, similar to Jim, this is my third career. So very excited about that. Had a variety. I actually come from the military in the U.S., West Point graduate, and then spent a decade in business in a variety of areas, sales, operations, and most recently in HR. And then in my 30s, decided to go into post-secondary and took a leap 3 years ago to come to Canada.
Cool. Thanks, Wanda. All right. Why don't I ask Robert to come up and say a few words about himself?
Good morning.
Hi, Robert. It's nice to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
We're the East Coast folks today.
Yeah. So I'm living and working in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Live here with my wife. I have 4 adult children, 6 grandchildren. The 4 children all have at least 1 degree from Dalhousie. Interesting that one of my daughters has an undergrad degree from the University of Calgary and did her MBA at Dal. In terms of my background, I'm actually an immigrant. So my family emigrated to Toronto when I was about 10 years old from Scotland, from the UK. So grew up in Toronto. The early part of my business career was in the food retailing and wholesaling world. Then in the 80s, I went to start up my first business on my own, venture capital funded business. Excuse me, moved to Atlantic Canada in 91, supposedly to do a turnaround for the Oshawa Group that turned into falling in love with Atlantic Canada and eventually going into business with one of Canada's great entrepreneurs, John Risley, and starting a company called Ocean Nutrition from basically an idea on a piece of paper and growing that over 15 years and ultimately selling that business to DSM in 2012. And the most recent part of my career has been running an impact investment fund for a family office that's based in the U.S., but we have investments in Canada, the United States, Mexico, and Panama. And I'm also a co-founder of the Ocean Supercluster here in Atlantic Canada. I'm the chair of Natural Products Canada Center of Excellence, chair of the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia, and also enjoy spending some time on the advisory board of Dalhousie's School of Management.
Cool. Thank you, Robert. So this is an exciting panel for me because in my, I'm in my inaugural year, at the end of my inaugural year as the dean here, and I've learned a lot from both talking to and watching each of you in your career. So I'm excited to learn a little bit more today, I'm sure. Let me dig in with a hard question. Why not, right? We know management education has to change and adapt, and that we need to kind of inspire those reforms as leaders in this space. And there's always challenges with that kind of change. Wanda and Jim, you're at university institutions as I am. Those come with their own kind of conservative frictions. I mean, why don't I ask you to jump in and talk a little bit about what kinds of reforms you think we need, and how can we be helpful in trying to inspire those changes? Whoever wants to jump in first can set the stage.
Yeah, well, as the U.S. citizen, I'm always ready to chomp it at the bit. So I'll go first. You Canadians are so kind. So I'll start. So I think I'll start with, and we've talked about this, as you know, Kim, as deans, right, of business schools, that I think the big piece that we have to pay attention to is the world is shifting and post-secondary is staying the same. And we, for some reason, think that today's youth and those who might seek additional information want it in the same way that's been going on for, hundreds of years. Well, newsflash, they don't. And quite frankly, everybody doesn't have the need, the wherewithal, the financial means, or the time to go and sit in a classroom for 4 years. So I think we're going to be forced, specifically to professions like business, to think of all the information, focusing on competencies and skills that folks might need to continue advancing in their careers. And we're going to have to package that quite differently. And maybe it's short courses. I'm not a big fan of this term micro-credentials, although I know what that means. I'm not a fan of badging, to be frank. But I do think packaging these things differently and delivering them differently, the pandemic has taught us a lot, right? About to what degree do we need to be face-to-face and share things in real, meaningful, experiential ways. So interested to hear what you think, Jim.
Yeah, well, thanks, Wanda. And, naturally, everything you say makes sense and is additive, and that's why you've been such a wonderful addition to the Canadian Business School Deans group. There's a lot of change, I think, that's going to come about. And I'll start with, and I liked, Wanda, that you went into how education is delivered. And I do believe lifelong learning is really important. We're seeing more and more interest in graduate programming, and whether it's certificates or micro-credentials, people who are coming back older in life and wanting to get that management understanding. And I think part of the reason for that is because the sense that it's no longer go to business school because you want to be rich. Go to business school because you want to understand how organizations operate, how to actually be effective at providing jobs for people, how to create dignity and good lives for other people. So in that sense, I'm very proud to be a business school dean. I think we all are, and we can see that we're making a real difference. I want to just add one other thing, though, because the 18-year-olds are interesting as well. And each year I survey all of our incoming students. One of the questions I ask them is, why did you go to business school? And the multiple choice answers, what I thought would be number one is because my parents told me to. It ends up being a very small percentage that will actually admit that. But every year there's a tie for number one, and it's I want to make a lot of money. I want to make a difference in the world. Mm-hmm. So I actually get them together and I say, look, are you guys what's your problem? You got a split personality. What's going on here? But they actually explained to me that they want to make a difference in the world, and they realize a business degree is a way to do that, because it doesn't matter if they go into not-for-profit, social enterprise, whatever they do. If they don't understand how finance and how people and how supply chain works, they can't make it.
Robert, can I put you a bit on the spot? You've had a slightly different trajectory, and I've really enjoyed listening to you talk a bit about how you've understood the role of formal and informal education over the course of your career and the kinds of knowledge that you've sort of pursued as your career has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, I'm kind of the one that doesn't look like the others here, as the only non-dean on the panel here. And I totally agree with what Wanda and Jim are saying in terms of some of the structural and component pieces of the education and responding to a new generation. But let me push it in a slightly different way. And that's that not just how we structure it, but what we're actually teaching, I think, has to change. By change, I think not kind of throwing out the past, but standing on the shoulders of all the knowledge and understanding and the disciplines, the business disciplines of the past, but expanding that. And I'm offering this view not just as a kind of personal opinion, but I think it's grounded in over 40 years of leadership, both in really large corporations as well as startups, building startups into multi-$100-million companies. The work I've been doing more recently over the last 8 years, coaching CEOs and their leadership teams inside our investment portfolio. And also, I've been working over the last 2 years with thought leaders out of Stanford and Berkeley who are examining the positive impacts of appropriating skills in philosophy and hermeneutics and language to enhance leadership performance. And so, from my point of view, there's really two things that I think learning needs to move in. One is developing skills for navigating in times of radical uncertainty. Business leaders and entrepreneurs have always had some capacity for, navigating in uncertain times. But the ability of leaders to recognize and lead their organizations through kind of ever more rapid emergencies and contingencies, I think, is now the most important element of leadership. And so how do we cultivate those kinds of skills? And given that these emergencies and contingencies are occurring ever more rapidly, leaving less time to deal with the events. In the 50s and 60s, it was time to do things. There's less time today. And so we require what I would call a greater need for learning anticipation rather than prediction, for learning collaborative and how to coordinate action versus command and control, where the leaders are really more generalists who can attune to situations, both corporate and societal moods, and include awareness of rapidly changing industries and how things are being disrupted. Electronic vehicles was a combination of computers and battery tech, and Uber was using personal devices to be able to disrupt an entire industry. And then I think also changes we're on the cusp of macro geopolitical changes between China, which will soon be the #1 economic power in the world, climate change, fundamental changes in the understandings of what freedom, truth, and the common good mean. And so I think that these capacity to navigate through those kinds of things is critical for leaders, and we need to start that education as part of their business education. And then lastly, I think that leaders need to have a sensibility about whole systems thinking and the interconnected nature of companies with their communities and with humankind and the rest of the planet. ESG is not just kind of some new trendy strategy piece. It's really a fundamental way of thinking about business and how it interacts with the community and the planet. So bringing those kinds of things into the curriculum, I think, is fundamental to the development of our future leaders.
Thanks, Robert. Wanda, I suspect you went in on this.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Great points, really. I think the other piece that becomes really important, and some of this is because of my background as a West Point graduate, but I think it's really critical that we also work with our students to help them understand the values and principles related to ethics and decision-making, right? Ethics actually matters. It can't just be about the almighty dollar. The second piece I would say related to Robert is this notion of disruption and the pace of change. But I want to push a little bit here, because the other piece we have to do is to prepare those folks who are entering into the business now at any age and at any stage for how do they anticipate what's coming. But I mean from a social perspective, right? For many people, what happened over the summer with Floyd was shocking. But I'm here to tell you, as an African-American and as a person of color in North America, it wasn't shocking. All of that has been happening forever. So how do we help our businesses and young people and leaders in general to be engaged in the social change that's happening? And what you were saying earlier, Kim, it's business for the greater good. It's what Jim was saying, right? Jim's saying they want to make a difference. Business for the greater good. It's what does it mean to be a good corporate citizen and to give back, right? So those are some of the things I think we also have to think about.
Jim, do you want to jump in, or should I pose another question?
Yeah, I think Robert's raised some really important points. And this idea of being able to adapt when change comes is like, how do you teach that? And so we've spent a lot of time on that. I think a lot of schools have. We've developed a program called Entrepreneurial Thinking, and every student has to take it, and they have to we throw them in groups. They don't decide to be with their friends. No, we tell them who their group is, and they have to develop a business. And you know what? It's better if they fail, because what we found is a lot of, for myself personally, failure was so important in growing and learning that, hey, you skin your knee and you get back up. It's all right. And so I don't know if that's what you were thinking, Robert, but those components of education are really important to teach people that it's okay to take risks, to try things. They don't work, but it's all right. You'll learn something from it and you'll try something different. So,
yeah,
Robert.
Yeah, I think that's, spot on. Certainly I can speak for myself. I had a lot of failures along the way. And as the old adage goes, you often learn a lot more from your failures than from your successes. And we have developed, look, I've got adult children, I guess you could call them millennials. And I think we developed a culture where we try to protect. Look, we're not asking people to go out and actually, set themselves up for failure, but trying to insulate people from failure, or somehow failure is a bad thing. This is particularly, I think, more prevalent in the Canadian culture, where we're a little bit less tolerant of risk and failure than it is, say, in the American business culture, where having tried and failed is an education opportunity, not something that's left as kind of a scar on your resume. So I think that's important, but I think there's a level of, before I did this work, out in California recently, early on when I was advising the business school, I was trying to encourage them to include, humanities courses into the requirement. So it's the growth of the individual. It's the developing of a self-awareness and a sensibility, or even an interest in the fact that as a human being, I have, some responsibilities and, to my community at large. And this capacity to shift from an I focus to a we focus as a part of a greater whole. And then I'm building a set of competencies. I think the other thing that happens is, everything's instant today, including an expectation of instant success. And, if you look at some of Dreyfus's work on adult education in particular, there's at least 6 stages of learning. Those apply, I think, also to our students. So, I do think that there's a requirement to set them up for this concept of lifelong learning. It isn't, and that there's a way of knowing that goes beyond knowledge, so that the education isn't just an exchange of ideas or thoughts or historic practices that are important to success in business, but there's something more that has to be added into the mix.
Can I just comment also? I like that, Robert, and I want to make the point that when you go from that I to we, that's where Wanda's commentary on inclusion is so important, because I think honestly, for decades, if not centuries in the West, we was not actually we. It didn't include everyone. And that's what we're seeing as a real opportunity going forward to really understand our blindness and our bias, and take it into account and be truly inclusive. Such an important point at this stage in our development.
So let me ask this. I mean, this is a pretty senior table of people who have taken on, by the introductions alone, you can see just a taste of the big projects that you've already taken on in your lives. Let me ask this. I mean, what does it take for us to educate people to have that kind of bravery or boldness in terms of the types of projects they approach? Or if you want to make it more personal, I guess I'm interested in what are the next big projects for you in terms of management education and the way we approach learning? Are there things that you would like to leave? Maybe this is mostly directed at Wanda and Jim, this piece of it, you know, as legacies in your own institutions. Robert, I mean, we can talk about that in the context of Dalhousie and our hopes and aspirations for our Faculty of Management. So you can take that question any way you want, but I'm kind of curious about big projects, bravery, boldness, willingness to fail, you know, what we'd like to leave as a kind of contribution that we could feel comfortable we'd made collaboratively or collectively together as we go through this, this project of making sure we offer a rich and robust management education.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy question.
Good morning, Jim.
You've had more than coffee, so. Well, I think I'll start with one area that I think is working out very well at our school, but it was a bit of a challenge. Okay, here's a description that I'll throw out there. We all go through grade school and we get into some kind of post-secondary, and that's fine. We get a bachelor degree, whatever. And for the most part, people then go out to work. And on the day that they start work, they're a member of a team. And from that point forward, they learn about how you do things in the world, in the business world, in the work world, wherever it is, as teams, and mostly multidisciplinary teams. There's those few that will choose to do a thesis master's and then a PhD. And along that path, it becomes less and less about what you do with others and more about what you do on your own. And so you actually go through that PhD dissertation, which is a solo effort, and you struggle through, you get it, and you get your degree, and you're now almost, like in a lot of cases, you're already like 30 years old. And then you start a job. And you've got tenure in front of you. And how do you get tenure? By publishing and what you publish, not, you know, how you work as a team. But you actually get a little bit of a reprieve from your publishing and research responsibilities when you get thrown in front of a class. And what's the number one thing that people actually fear? Public speaking. So you're thrown in front of a bunch of undergraduate students who actually aren't even interested in accounting. Because they don't really care. So anyhow, it's quite a struggle for academics. By the time they actually get their tenure, a lot of them are actually bitter and confused, and it's a tough thing. So what I've really aimed at is that can we bring the business environment of team to a business school, to an academic unit? And we've been working on that for 8 years now, and I think it's quite good now. You know, people actually, we view tenure as takes a village concept. And so that's the biggest project I think I've ever taken on, Kim. And I don't know, we'll see if it works.
Neat. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, I would say that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wanda, please.
Oh, thank you. What I would say is my faculty colleagues often laugh when I say this, but I'm always saying, you know, if we would just do what we teach, we'd be fine. And then they laugh and they go, oh, wait, she's serious. Yes, I am. And by that, I mean a bit of what Jim's talking about, but I've now positioned the school, and certainly this is my orientation, that I want us to pilot things, right? So if there's something out there, I come from an institution that's quite young and yet steeped in the past. And so they'll often say, well, that's just the way it's done. Well, no, it's not actually. Or we can't do that. Well, yeah, we can. And what if? Like, how about asking what if? And so I'm actually positioning the school, and we're doing it quite well to say, hey, we'll take that on and figure out how to make it happen and then let it go. But we're so afraid, to Jim's point, and Robert said this too, we're risk averse here. And what I say we have to do is actually to model what we're teaching and to not be afraid to try new things. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But almost everything can be fine-tuned. And my whole career's been that. I guarantee you everybody on this call is where they are because we screwed up royally once and nobody fired us. And they're like, yeah, but you had good intentions. Keep going, right? I had a boss say to me once, I'd rather rein in a thoroughbred than kick a mule. And that's been my orientation. So how do we set folks up to be successful, recognizing that success isn't just, oh, I had the perfect career. Like, okay, that's good if you want to go in politics, but it's not good in business.
Yeah, I think this is just so spot on. I think more than anything, restructuring, how business schools are set up, what's in the curriculum. And then I think, as you're both saying, modeling the behavior and the practices that you're teaching. So, I often, when I'm coaching some of my teams, I often say, look, you can read 100 books on how to ride a bicycle. You will not know how to ride a bicycle till you get on the bicycle and you fall off several times and skin your knees and then get up again. And so that's the difference between knowledge and knowing. And so the transfer of knowledge in and of itself is required, but insufficient for knowing. And so we're in the business of developing capacity for knowing in our students. And so modeling the behavior as a faculty, I think is critically important. The other thing I think we have to demystify, back to courage. One of my favorite sayings is, there are no extraordinary people. There are only ordinary people who have committed to extraordinary goals. And so learning what it means to commit, again, these are things that are part of looking at speech act theory and how we, through our language, everything we do is created in language, how we create the future through language. And so understanding something, it's like we're the proverbial fish in water. We live in language, and until we pull ourselves out of the water, we don't know what water is as that fish. So we have to understand the power of language and how we create coordinated action through language. We are actually always creating our future together when we're looking at action. And so the skill of doing that is just an absolutely essential skill in the future of leadership in any capacity. Even in the leadership in the public sector is the same thing. We are creating the future all the time. So some skill needs to be developed around how we actually go about building coordinated action to create the futures that we want for ourselves.
Boy, Robert, that's a big hope, I think, a big challenge for those of us who are sort of immersed daily in the kind of formal educative function of universities. But I kind of want to end on that almost, but I can't help myself because it feels like this session, even though we're getting close to 30 minutes, has been so great and it's moved so fast for me. So let me ask one more question, just so at least people can feel like they have a chance to intervene in a final way. And so let me ask you, we talked a bit about lifelong learning. That's been one of the ongoing themes. That's kind of an old school way of saying it, but I don't have a better way of capturing it as something that's increasingly important for us to think through. Let me ask you, maybe as a final comment, each of you, if you're up for it, to kind of riff on that topic. And you could talk a little bit about, at this stage in our careers, what is it that would be beneficial for us? What do we think we could benefit from? I mean, we're all sort of constantly in this process of lifelong learning. Robert, the kind of conversation you're starting about how we open up possibilities through the way that we understand and articulate what it is that we're seeing as part of creating our own futures. I think of that as something that is maybe easier to wrap your head around the older you get and the more kind of experiences you've had. So I see it as sort of connected to that question too, and ask you to think about some final reflections that you might offer to folks who have joined us for this session. Sure.
I always, again, remember, how smart my parents got by the time I got to be 30. Look, lifelong learning, I took a kind of circuitous route as a university dropout to building a career for myself, and through collaborating with a lot of other people. but I think that let me say this from two areas. One is individuals. I think it's essential with the rate of change that leaders are doing something to enhance their capabilities. I went back, 5 or 6 years ago and took a certification in executive coaching because I saw that the management skills of command and control largely and problem solving only were insufficient for me, leading groups. And when I was no longer the CEO, but I was coaching CEOs, how did I do that in a different way, which meant I personally had to show up in a different way. So that learning on a personal basis needs to continue all through the life. The other thing is, I think at the university level, I think universities are missing a massive, massive opportunity in terms of educating people who have or post their graduate. If you look at what systems like Tech Canada do and the McKay CEO forums and those, they're providing these networks and shared experiences, learning experiences, and coaching, and people are paying huge amount of money to be participants in those programs because bit by bit, leaders are not lone rangers. We're getting over the myth of the singular leader who has all the answers, and realizing that we have to build teams successfully, and that takes different skills. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for universities to create forums where leaders can continue with them for decades. Harvard does a little bit of that, but most universities really don't do it very well. And I think it's a big opportunity.
Jim?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kim, and thanks, Robert. Really insightful. I'll just tell you real quickly, we can go through the numbers sometime, but exec ed is not an easy business. But I'm a big believer. I've got my real estate license, did coaching, did the director's program, on and on. So I totally agree with you. And actually, if I was 20 years younger, I'd be taking everything I could see on data analytics and artificial intelligence because it's such a huge part of the world. But where I am right now in my life, I'm going to start taking courses on art history and music history and try to learn about the beauty around us. That's where I am.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Jim. Wanda?
Yeah, that's special, Jim. Thank you for sharing that. You too, Robert. For me, it's about letting go of the barriers and breaking out, if you will, right? We all constrain ourselves. And I took a leadership course this past summer online, believe it or not. And the premise of the whole thing was, it wasn't a typical leadership course with a bunch of theory. It literally was, what does it mean to show up as a leader every day? And what I started to recognize is I look at the world through certain lenses, which I knew, but those lenses actually limit my decisions. And so often when I'm faced with a tough decision, I'm looking at it from, okay, what's the political aspect? What do I have to, oh, that person's not going to like this. And what I realized is, wait a minute, I'm doing that. So all ways of being and knowing, all kinds of decisions are available to me. I'm the one who's limiting that. So what I'm trying to do is to say, wait a minute, I know what the best decision is, and I recognize that everybody's not going to like it, but I know what's in the best interest of what we're trying to do to move us forward. So that would be the first thing that I'm really working on. And then this notion of trying to help others recognize what's the worst thing that can happen, because people are so terrified to act. And I mean, especially in post-secondary, God forbid we actually do something without having a 95% freaking confidence level. I mean, just go do it. And my colleagues now in Dean's Council, they're like, here it comes, here it comes. Do something. Could we just do something? I don't care what it is. Just go do something. So that's my new mantra this year. Do something and just go do it. Like mini Nike. But so those are the two things I'm working on right now.
Awesome. Well, I feel just so delighted, you three, that this is the final of the series. It's been just a perfect capstone for me of these conversations we've been having about the future of management education. And what a pleasure to get to spend this morning, getting close to the afternoon for those of us on the East Coast, but this morning with you. So for those of you who are listening, I'd really be happy to hear from you and your thoughts. My email is at the bottom of this. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thanks especially to our distinguished panelists today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.